Thank you everyone for your patience. And thank you very much to Marco for the invitation and to Marco and Lisa for organizing this visit. Very glad to be speaking here and to be enjoying the hospitality of Chapman University. Today I would like to talk about the philosophical significance of Gödel's Dialectica translation, a lesser known part of Gödel's corpus. The Dialectica translation is a mathematically rather surprising reduction of quantificational theories of arithmetic to a quantifier-free theory called T of so-called computable functions of finite type, or actually primitive recursive functionals of finite type. This translation is mathematically very beautiful, and it's well known and loved in the proof theory community, but outside of that specialist community, it's perhaps not so well known to logicians and philosophers of mathematics generally. And I think it is safe to say it has not made that much of a splash in philosophy of mathematics. But Gödel intended his translation to have great philosophical significance, and he tries in various ways over more than 30 years to articulate what that significance would be. In his earlier writings on the topic, he presents the translation as an improvement to the foundations of intuitionistic logic. In his later writings, he switches focus and presents it as a Hilbert-style consistency proof for arithmetic. And it is this latter presentation that I want to focus on today. So I have a lot of text from Gödel in the handout, and my plan is just for us to read through Gödel's philosophical claims about the Dialectica translation, think through them together, and try to evaluate these claims. So, let me read the abstract. It's a good place for us to start. Hilbert's program, one of the greatest programs in the foundations of mathematics. Hilbert's program in the 1920s aimed to give finitary consistency proofs for infinitary mathematics, thus putting infinitary mathematics on a more secure footing. There is a popular narrative that Hilbert's program was decisively refuted by Gödel's incompleteness theorems in 1931. However, Hilbert's school continued to work on consistency proofs for decades after the appearance of the incompleteness theorems, and moreover, Gödel himself, in a remarkable paper of 1958, pursues a modified version of Hilbert's program. He presents his Dialectica translation as a new Hilbert-style consistency proof for arithmetic, based on an extension of Hilbert's finitary standpoint, and he clearly regards this proof as epistemologically significant. So this is our puzzle today. Is there any truth to the claim that Hilbert's program was refuted by the incompleteness theorems? What epistemological significance did Gödel ascribe to his Dialectica translation, and was he correct about this? Below the abstract, you can see a timeline.
I need to do it.
Thank you.
Tell me what I have to do, and I do.
Perfect. So we have a timeline of the major events for this talk. 1925 is when Hilbert gave his lecture on the infinite, which begins the mature phase of his proof theory. When Gödel in the Dialectic paper discusses Hilbert's finitism and Hilbert's program of finding consistency proofs, he always refers to this paper. So my exposition of Hilbert is going to be following Gödel, focused on this paper. It's a story that will be very familiar to specialists here. 1931 is when Gödel's incompleteness theorems appear. 1941 is when Gödel first unveils the Dialectica translation to the world. He presents the translation in lectures at Princeton and Yale. The Princeton lectures was a full semester-long lecture course. The Yale lecture was a one-off lecture event. And actually, the Yale lecture is, in my opinion, his most beautiful exposition of the Dialectica translation. If you are excited by this topic and want to read one thing, read the Yale lecture. It is very lucid and informal and lovely. The Yale lecture is titled, "In What Sense is Intuitionistic Logic Constructive?" Okay, 1958 is when he finally publishes the translation for the first time in a Festschrift for Bernays, Hilbert's closest collaborator. Why didn't he publish it in 1941? Well, we don't really know, but he did tell his brother years later that at the Yale lecture no one was interested, And so perhaps this discouraged him from publishing it at the time. And perhaps it also explains why he wants to reframe it as a consistency proof. And then in 1967, an English translation of the original paper appears, and Gödel is given this translation to revise it. And the hope was it would be published in the Dialectica journal where the original appeared. Gödel worked on this translation, or on the revisions to the translation for years, and it made it as far as the galley proof stage, and then he never returned he corrects the galley proofs and never returns them to the editor. Gödel was notorious for stringing his editors along for years and then never submitting anything. So that is the history of the paper. And in this talk, I'll be focusing on the 1958 version of the paper, but the translations I'll give you will be the revised English translations from 72. I think that they're philosophically very continuous, although that's an assumption you could question. Okay. Maybe let me just pause here to check that all the technical stuff is working well. Can everyone in the Zoom hear me okay? Can everyone in the Zoom see the handout? Is everything good? Okay, I'm not hearing complaints. So let's move on. Section 1. Hilbert's program after incompleteness. Okay. So the aim of Hilbert's program was to give a finitary consistency proof for infinitary mathematics. Infinitary mathematics is going to include classical theories of arithmetic, analysis, set theory. Okay. What does finitary mean here? What does consistency proof mean? Hilbert has a two-layer view of mathematics. Mathematics has a finitary part and an infinitary part. Finitary mathematics does not presuppose the actual infinite, and that part is epistemologically unproblematic, whereas infinitary mathematics presupposes the actual infinite and is epistemologically problematic, Hilbert thinks. What is the epistemological problem? In his lecture on the infinite, he formulates this problem of the infinite, which is the next thing on your handout, that actual infinity is not representable in concrete spatio-temporal intuition. Hilbert means concrete intuition in a broadly Kantian sense here. So in other words, the problem of the infinite is that I cannot have infinitely many pebbles, I cannot see infinitely many pebbles, I cannot even imagine in a visual spatio-temporal way infinitely many pebbles or infinitely many tally marks. So Hilbert is worried, but I cannot represent in any concrete spatio-temporal way an actual infinity of discrete things. So, Hilbert claims, reasoning about the actual infinite is epistemologically problematic for this reason, because it is not concrete, it is not grounded in our concrete experience of the world. I put a question mark there because, you might say, well, there is no problem here, but Hilbert thinks there is a problem. Okay, finitary mathematics, as I was saying, that part he considers to be epistemologically unproblematic. Why is finitary mathematics unproblematic? Well, we get several different characterizations of finitary mathematics from Hilbert. The philosophical characterization is that finitary mathematics is based on thought experiments conducted in concrete intuition. So these thought experiments are basically moving pebbles around. I either have or imagine some pebbles, and I do pebble arithmetic. So 2 + 3 = 5 is a finitary proposition because I can have 2 pebbles and 3 pebbles and move them together. X + y = y + x is a finitary proposition because I can imagine a group of x pebbles and a group of y pebbles, and it does not matter what order I put them. So these things are all okay things. Because finitary mathematics stays within the realm of concrete intuition, it's more secure or evident than infinitary mathematics. Okay, that's the philosophical claim. Over the page, we also get a more mathematical characterization of the distinction between finitary and infinitary mathematics. Hilbert says the first place where the bounds of concrete intuition are overstepped is when we get existential quantifiers ranging over an infinite totality. So for example, there is a prime number greater than 10 to the 10 to the 100. Hilbert says that claim presupposes the actual infinite. I actually find this a somewhat hard example to understand. Maybe a more intuitive example is the next one. For every number x, there is a prime p greater than x. I think this claim is more clearly infinitary because it is a way of saying there are infinitely many primes. And I think it is at least quite plausible that once you start allowing existential quantifiers ranging over an infinite totality, in pretty much any reasonable theory that you might actually want to work with, it'll become possible to start proving statements like the second one. And so there is some justification for saying existential quantifiers are something you don't want to have if you're a finitist. Okay, so that in brief is the characterization of finitary mathematics. Now what about a consistency proof? What is a consistency proof supposed to do? Well, Hilbert wants, in some sense, to justify infinitary mathematics using only finitary mathematics. But what kind of justification is it supposed to provide? Consistency means freedom from contradiction. So one thing, this is not on the handout, but one thing, the most obvious thing that a consistency proof is supposed to do is show that infinitary mathematics is free from contradiction, but using only finitary means of proof in the proof. That's one thing a consistency proof does. But there is something else that it does as well, which is less obvious. In ordinary arithmetical contexts, a consistency proof also establishes what I call the finitary correctness of infinitary mathematics, which is that every finitary statement provable using the infinitary methods is true. So the infinitary theory is correct about finitary statements. In other words, numerical equations and simple generalizations like x plus y equals y plus x. This finitary correctness thing is very important. Hilbert makes a great deal out of it. And the reason is that it puts a different philosophical cast on what the program is doing, which is that it lets us, I was saying there is this two-layer picture of finitary versus infinitary mathematics. Hilbert is going to think about the two layers in very different ways. The finitary layer is real, true, meaningful mathematics. The infinitary layer can be viewed as merely ideal or meaningless, a mere apparatus for getting more finitary truths or correct finitary claims. So a consistency proof would provide an instrumentalist justification for the use of infinitary mathematics by showing that even if it's viewed as a completely meaningless apparatus, nevertheless it's a reliable apparatus for getting more of the statements that we actually trust and believe in and consider to be meaningful. And in the parentheses I mentioned Kronecker, Brouwer, and Weil, Hilbert has a polemical motive for this program. He is not just motivated by pure philosophical considerations in a vacuum. He has a concrete polemical motive, which is that there were mathematicians, Kronecker, Brouwer, Weil, and others, who were skeptical of infinitary mathematics, and particularly of set theory. And some of these mathematicians, especially Brouwer and Weil, would say that certain infinitary statements were meaningless abstract nonsense. Hilbert is making an amazing gambit here. He is saying, I can concede every philosophical claim to my opponents. I'll concede that infinitary mathematics is meaningless, and nevertheless I'm going to give you a reason to not throw it away by showing that it is a reliable apparatus for getting more meaningful mathematics. Okay, that's Hilbert's program in a nutshell. Now, the standard narrative is that Hilbert's program was completely destroyed by Gödel's incompleteness theorems, more precisely the second incompleteness theorem. So this theorem says, speaking informally, that for any sufficiently powerful mathematical theory U, there can be no consistency proof for U using only the means of proof available within U itself. In particular, for some given infinitary theory, I'm going to focus on classical first-order arithmetic, Peano arithmetic. For Peano arithmetic, you cannot have a consistency proof for PA using only the means of proof available within PA. Okay, that is what the theorem says. Why is this a problem? Well, it was widely agreed that the methods of Hilbert's finitary mathematics would just be included within the methods of PA. They would be a proper subset of the methods of PA. And in that case, then the second incompleteness theorem does show you cannot have a consistency proof like Hilbert wanted. So Hilbert's program fails? Question mark. Well, does it fail? The theorem does not exactly show that the whole program fails, but it does show that if you're going to give a consistency proof for a theory like PA, it cannot look like the picture on the left of the handout, where we have some tiny fragment, primitive recursive arithmetic, of PA. You cannot hope to prove the consistency on the basis of some tiny fragment, but you could prove the consistency using some theory like T on the right here, which partly overlaps with PA, but also includes some other stuff that's not in PA. You could have a proof like that, and maybe you could argue that T is a finitary theory, or at any rate that T is somehow epistemologically better than PA. But now this becomes a very delicate question. If the picture was like the picture on the left, we would not have so much philosophical work to do, because it would seem to be a decisive improvement to be able to show the consistency of the theory using some tiny part. If the picture is like on the right, now you have to start asking, what's the justification for the methods used in T? It goes beyond PA. What's the justification for those methods? Is T really epistemologically better than PA? Or is PA really the better theory? And maybe we should be trying to prove the consistency of T on the basis of PA. It becomes much more philosophically delicate to explain why this would be significant. Okay, and let me just get one other concept on the table now. So Hilbert's school does continue to try to find consistency proofs that look like the picture on the right. And they rebrand the program. Instead of casting it in terms of finitary versus infinitary, the buzzword becomes constructive for the Hilbert school. So Gensen and his successors speak of giving a constructive consistency proof for non-constructive mathematics. And I say this term is a buzzword because they never precisely define or demarcate what counts as constructive. And I think this is a big problem for them. There is no clear demarcation of this constructive standpoint. So we do not know what means we're allowed to use in the consistency proof, or why these means of proof are philosophically better, epistemologically better than whatever we were trying to prove the consistency of. So these are my two questions, which will be the topic of the rest of the talk. What does constructive mean? Why is constructive mathematics epistemologically better than non-constructive? And just to foreshadow my conclusions, this is in the box at the bottom. I think Gödel has a really good answer to the first question. He has an interesting principled definition of constructive based on an interesting analysis of Hilbert's finitism. But he has no good answer to the second question. And so I'm going to offer a different answer to the second question on Gödel's behalf. I think the real philosophical significance of the Dialectica translation requires getting away from consistency proofs altogether in the end. I ultimately want to think of this translation as assigning a constructive meaning to arithmetic, not functioning as a Hilbert-style consistency proof. In other words, I think the real contribution is that it gets us away from Hilbert's instrumentalism. But more on that later.
What does it mean, assigning constructive meaning? Mean that what the constructively piano arithmetic means is expressed in a transparent way by the translation of any of its theorem according to the Dialectica translation. That's what you mean?
Yeah, I'm thinking
theorem,
each...
I translate, and this translation gives out the constructive meaning.
I think not just every theorem, but even every statement, every sentence in the language of piano arithmetic will be assigned some kind of constructive meaning, a correlate or a counterpart. The constructive meaning will be something that a constructivist recognizes as completely meaningful mathematics. And in the case where the statement is a theorem of Hating or piano arithmetic, In the case where it's a theorem, then the constructive meaning takes on a particularly good form. Yeah. It becomes a theorem of T. Yeah. Okay.
But can I prove the theorem within the constructive? I have a theorem in PA.
Mm-hmm.
Means that if it is a theorem, I can give a proof in PA. I can translate the proof in T in such a way that the translation of the proof in PA in T is a proof of the statement in T.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. The sense of translation is a little bit delicate here because normally when one speaks of an interpretation in logic, you're interpreting a first-order theory and a first-order theory. But T is quantifier-free. T is not a first-order theory. So the sense in which it's an interpretation requires a little bit of explaining. But it is basically what you say. You can take a proof in Peano arithmetic and the proof will translate in a very modular way, in a way that tracks the structure of the proof. It will translate to completely good reasoning in T. It is completely amazing. It's a very beautiful thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions at this stage? Okay, let me keep moving. Section 2, the Dialectica paper. So I'd like us to just read the introduction to the Dialectica paper, since I do not presuppose that anyone has familiarity with this paper. I think this is a fascinating philosophical introduction that Gödel gives here. So here's the 1972 version of the paper. Gödel, and the title of the paper is On an Extension of Finitary Mathematics That Has Not Yet Been Used. Bernays has pointed out on several occasions that in view of the fact that the consistency of a formal system cannot be proved by any deduction procedures available in the system itself, it is necessary to go beyond the framework of finitary mathematics in Hilbert's sense in order to prove the consistency of classical mathematics or even of classical number theory. Since finitary mathematics is defined as the mathematics of concrete intuition, this seems to imply that abstract concepts are needed for the proof of consistency of number theory. An extension of finitism by such concepts was explicitly suggested by Bernays in his 1935 paper. By abstract concepts in this context are meant concepts which are essentially of the second or higher level, i.e., which do not have as their content properties or relation of concrete objects, such as combinations of symbols, but rather of thought structures or thought contents, for example, proofs, meaningful propositions, and so on, where in the proofs of propositions about these mental objects, insights are needed which are not derived from a reflection upon the combinatorial space-time properties of the symbols representing them, but rather from a reflection upon the meanings involved. At any rate, Bernays' observations teach us to distinguish two component parts in the concept of finitary mathematics, namely, first, the constructivistic element, which consists in admitting reference to mathematical objects or facts only in the sense that they can be exhibited or obtained by construction or proof. Second, the specifically finitistic element, which requires, in addition, that the objects and facts considered should be given in concrete mathematical intuition. This, as far as the objects are concerned, means that they must be finite space-time configurations of elements whose nature is irrelevant except for equality or difference. In contrast to this, the objects of intuitionistic logic are meaningful propositions and proofs. It is the second requirement which must be dropped. Until now, this fact was taken into account by adjoining to finitary mathematics parts of intuitionistic logic and of the constructivistic theory of ordinal numbers. It will be shown in the sequel that instead, one can use, for the proof of consistency of number theory, a certain concept of a computable function of finite type over the natural numbers and some very elementary axioms and principles of construction for such functions. And then he launches into the mathematical exposition. This is quite a remarkable introduction. I will make a couple of comments. about it. The first sentence, he begins with this remark that he attributes to Bernays. The claim that Bernays is making is nothing other than Gödel's own second incompleteness theorem. He is being very modest, putting his incompleteness theorem in Bernays' mouth. But I think he is not just being modest, but he is actually being strategic as well. He is trying to present his dialectic translation in a conservative light as a development within Hilbertian tradition, rather than as making a radical break from Hilbert and Bernays. And so he is citing Bernays as an authority. Again, an extension of finitism by such concepts was explicitly suggested by Bernays. Why does he feel the need to have Bernays as authority? It is because, this is my next point, it is because he is really throwing Hilbert and Bernays' philosophical framework completely out the window. He is being much more radical than he is letting on, because for Hilbert and Bernays, finitary mathematics is philosophically characterized as the mathematics of concrete intuition. Within the framework of Hilbert's program, as set out in 1925, as set out even officially in 1934 in the Grundlagen, it just makes no sense to say, I'm going to do Hilbert's program, but hold the concrete intuition. It makes no philosophical sense. The problem of the infinite was a problem about what can and can't be represented in concrete intuition. If you throw out concrete intuition, you have to throw out this problem of the infinite and find some other explanation. So Gödel really foregrounds that he wants to bring in abstract concepts and he needs some other characterization of this problem. Okay. What is the characterization? I think we should read his two component parts business in the next paragraph. The two component parts, we should read this in a somewhat strong way. He is saying we throw away the specifically finitistic part and we keep the constructivistic element. And I think we should read it even more strongly as saying this constructivistic element is what gives such a consistency proof its philosophical significance. The constructivistic element is the epistemological key. This is not explicit in the text, but I think it is the way to approach it. But his explanation of the constructivistic element is very terse and not very clear. At least I do not find it very clear.
But there is something that is not clear to not clear. The constructive element consists in a neat reference to mathematical objects or facts only in the sense that they can be exhibited or obtained by construction. So in the end of the story, does this mean something else than simply to say that they do not admit existence proof, direct existence proof? Any existence proof has to be given by the exhibition of instance. This is what it means?
This is what I think he means, and I have some texts on the next page to support this. So, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down to the next page of the handout, I will argue exactly that this is what he means. So what is the constructivistic element? We can get some help from his earlier presentation of the Dialectica translation, 1941.
But then, if this is the point, there are a lot of proof in the arithmetics that satisfy this constraint without a necessity of any translation. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, in this sense, if I have a proof of the arithmetic that prove existence. For example, if I want to prove that exists a number greater than 3, I say 4. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so this I do not need the dialectical translation. Mm-hmm. And this is a perfectly good proof within arithmetic that satisfies this constraint that there is a number greater than 3. So now I have to, in order to satisfy this constraint for some proofs, I need to make the translation of all proofs. So that is strange.
That is an interesting point. He seems to think of constructivity or non-constructivity as being a property of the system as a whole. Somehow he seems to be thinking about it at that level. But it's interesting to ask why. Why not just do it with the individual proofs? I mean, I suppose in the case of the theorem you just mentioned, To prove that there exists a number greater than 3, you just write down 4 and show right 4 is greater than 3. I suppose you could give a proof of that in Peano arithmetic, which would just also be a proof in T. So that may partly handle the worry. Maybe that's the thing he should say.
Basically, the idea is that the translation automatically guarantees that any proof that is constructive in Peano arithmetic is also constructive in the translation. Any proof that is not constructive in Peano arithmetic, it becomes constructive in the translation.
Yeah, I think that is roughly correct, because you can do it so that the primitive recursive arithmetic fragment of PA just gets translated as itself.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would be kind of a nice way of formally implementing the idea that that part is really fine and doesn't need any tinkering. Yeah.
Okay. So if I prove that I systematically have stated any proof, any theorem in arithmetic is constructively provable.
At least that it has a constructive surrogate, which ultimately I will say the surrogate is it's classically, from a classical point of view, very close in meaning to the original theorem. As close as the Skolmization of a theorem is to the original theorem. It's that close in meaning, but the constructive theorem can be constructively proved in T. Yeah.
Okay. And any theorem that is not constructively proven in Peano has a correlate that is constructively proven indirectly.
Yeah, even the non-constructive existence proofs in Peano arithmetic will have some kind of surrogate or counterpart in T. But the essentially non-constructive existence proofs are going to, their constructive meaning will be more complicated than a constructive proof would be. It'll involve more higher type objects. So yeah, we can talk about that. But it'll be more abstract. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you for these lovely questions. Okay, let me say a little more about the constructivistic element, and maybe I'll try to move a little faster for the sake of time. Okay, so in the 1941 Yale lecture, Gödel has this notion of strictly constructive, and he has 3 requirements for a system to be strictly constructive. So here they are. Let me call a system strictly constructive or finitistic if it satisfies these 3 requirements. Firstly, relations and functions must be decidable and calculable. Secondly, no existential quantifiers at all. Thirdly, no propositional operations applied to universal propositions. In particular, no negated universal statements will be really important. I don't know if the name finitistic is very well chosen, but there is certainly a close relationship between these systems and what Hilbert called the finite Einstellung. These 3 requirements of a strictly constructive system, I think, are a firm fixed point in Gödel's thinking about constructivity in the 1930s. They appear in his 1933 lecture in Cambridge, in his 1938 lecture at CSU. In the earlier lectures, he also considers some additional requirements, but the requirements here from the Yale lecture, which also show up in the Princeton lectures, these 3 requirements occur in every exposition where he discusses.
So the third condition is simply to avoid the simple elimination of existential quantifier, but non Ferroni non.
Exactly. If you just replace the existential quantifiers by not for all not, then you get a perfect surrogate for non-constructive existence proofs, and we don't want that. Yeah. So long story short, I think the way to understand Gödel's constructivistic element, if you squint at the somewhat impenetrable clause that he gives in 1972 and 1958, I think it is a very convoluted and compressed way of saying a constructivistic system has no existential quantifiers, no negated universal quantifiers. And the decidability thing is sort of implicitly in there because if the primitive notions are allowed to be undecidable, then you can smuggle in all kinds of infinitary stuff. So it wouldn't make sense for it to call it constructivistic in that case, or to consider it a genuine exhibition or construction. How does this link up with what he actually says in the passage? Well, he says admitting the constructivistic element consists in admitting reference to mathematical objects only in the sense that they can be exhibited or obtained by construction. He is quite careful to speak of reference to objects. And in the German text, there is also this, he says that there can only be talk of mathematical objects insofar as, so I think he is considering different ways of speaking of objects that you can have in a mathematical theory. One way of speaking of mathematical objects is to name them with a term, an explicit description. Another way of speaking of mathematical objects is this indirect way where we have existential quantifiers, or where we might have negated universal quantifiers as well, not for all not. So we do not want to have those indirect ways of speaking mathematical objects. In a strictly constructivistic system, the only way to speak of objects is to exhibit them explicitly somehow. And why would you want to do this? Well, as Marco was bringing out, the point is that Gödel really wants to avoid the non-constructive existence proofs. So the focus is changing from the problem of the infinite, which disappears, I think. Essentially, the problem of the infinite disappears from Gödel's extended finitism and becomes replaced by this problem of avoiding non-constructive existence proofs. So here's a passage from the Princeton lectures. He says, the problem arises how to axiomatize mathematics in such a manner that such undesirable things as non-constructive existence proofs can never happen, i.e., such that the proof of any existential proposition yields a way to find the thing whose existence is asserted. Okay, I gave an example of a non-constructive existence proof yesterday when I was talking with the grad students. I will just give the same example again because it is very beautiful and maybe some people have not seen it before. What are these non-constructive existence proofs?
Sure. Speak of mathematics, not of arithmetics. So it thinks that his idea can apply in general to any mathematical theory, not only to piano arithmetics.
That's a good question. I don't know of any place where he explicitly applies it outside of arithmetic. I should say that the Dialectica translation can be extended to second-order arithmetic, so to analysis, and Gödel originally wanted such an extension. So he does want at least more of mathematics than just first-order arithmetic, but he does not, to my knowledge, really, I don't know of anything concrete and specific that he says about what really counts as constructive outside of it.
He does not try to do it for set theory, for example.
He doesn't try to do it for set theory. There have been extensions of the Dialectica translation to so-called constructive set theory. Yeah, but Gödel does not.
Okay.
Discuss. Yeah.
Okay, good example.
Yeah, okay, so here's the beautiful example of a non-constructive existence proof. And so let me just, is this visible on the Zoom?
Now, no, but possible now, yes, a moment.
Did you stop sharing?
Now it's visible, perhaps.
Is it? Yeah, just stop sharing and you will see.
Stop share.
Stop share, right?
Marco, you are sharing, right?
Stop share, yes.
I
I stopped share. I don't know what to do. Stop share. Ah, I did not stop share. Okay, good. Sorry.
Is this, yeah, okay, it looks visible. Okay, theorem. There exist irrational numbers, a and b, such that a to the power of b is rational. proof. Consider square root 2 to the power square root 2. Of course, square root 2 is irrational. So this number is either rational or irrational. In the first case, if it is rational, then we are done. Because we have irrational to the irrational equals rational. So if rational, then done. If it is irrational, then we raise it to the power root 2 again. And we get rational. And we are again done. So we know one of the following two pairs works. Either root 2, or root 2 to the root 2, root 2 works. One of these works, and we have absolutely no idea which one it is. So it is non-constructive. We show the existence of two numbers a, b, but we do not know which ones they are. And in some sense, we have no deeper insight into why the thing is true. It's a short, beautiful argument. It is clever, but it feels like a trick. Feels like a clever trick. And it is hard to see how you are going to get much of a theory out of this. So Gödel speaks of non-constructive existence proofs as strange and surprising, and he even says undesirable. Undesirable might be a bit strong. There is something beautiful about it. Also, this example is not really very non-constructive in the sense that at least we narrowed it down to two possibilities. So you might say, well, gee, we should cut ourselves some slack here. At least we narrowed it down to two. But anyhow, so that's an example of a non-constructive existence. Gödel never actually says why he doesn't like the non-constructive existence proofs. He just thinks that they have this strange character. I would very tentatively venture to suggest it is because the proofs are not sufficiently informative. They don't really tell you why the thing is true. There's something undesirable about it. But Gödel never explicitly says this, so I don't know. Okay, so that then is Gödel's characterization of the constructivistic element.
Yes, but take this proof. This proof is, you can write this proof within an extension of piano arithmetics where you are irrational in some way. So I don't think that it's very difficult to write it in piano. But here it's not constructive. But I do not see any existential quantifier in this proof. So the fact that it's not constructive does not depend on the existence of an existential quantifier. What is an existential quantifier here?
That is true. There is
even I have the existence is given by concrete example. Simply, I don't know which one, but I have two concrete examples, either one or the other word.
Yeah, so in this case, it is not really that good of an example of non-constructive existential statement. The non-constructivity has been carried by the or in some sense.
Exactly.
So you can view a disjunction as a kind of existential quantification over the set 0, 1. There exists a disjunct, which is true. That's the sort of sense in which it is like a non-constructive existence proof. But yeah, it is maybe not the best example. It's a beautiful and a simple example to explain, but it's not the most non-constructive thing in the world.
But I think that you get the problem even if you have only two things to choose from. It's even more convincing.
Okay.
Sorry, what's the point?
I mean, the speaker makes the point that true, you're not existentially quantifying over an infinite set. But that makes this example, in my view, even more interesting. So even if you have only two things to choose from, it can still be non-constructive. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, but I'm going to say, of course, I am to prove that it exists to number such and such.
Yeah.
But the proof that I give is a proof by exhibition. Simply, I do not know whether the exhibition is the first one or the second one. Both of them are exhibitions. I am not giving a proof by contradiction. The proof are direct. And now I know that either square root of 2 is an instance, or square root of 2 power square root of 2 square root of 2 is an instance. In what case I have a clear instance. The only thing that I don't know is which the one or the other.
So why is
I
that?
am not asked to exist
Why is
because the
this an
non-existence
interesting point to
would
make?
provide the contradiction.
Why is this an interesting point to make?
Because it says, because it's in Gödel says that the non-constructive element is given by the presence of existence proof that are not by exhibition. This is a proof by exhibition, simply by not, so to say, I do not decide which exhibition is good, but either one exhibition or the other exhibition is good.
No, I understand the point you're making. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
could be, for example, the existence of a transcendental number by saying the algebraic numbers are countable. So we are not exhibiting anything.
That's a nice example.
Would that be one of those?
Exactly. And this is another story, completely different argument.
Yeah. Another famous example of a non-constructive theorem is Koenig's lemma. So if I have an infinite but finitely branching tree, then there exists an infinite path through the tree. And the proof is, well, at each step it is only finitely branching. So you start at the top. Okay, you only have finitely many ways you can go. One of the ways must have infinitely many nodes below it, because otherwise you would have a finite sum of finitely many nodes. So pick an infinite one and then keep going. This sounds like an algorithm, but it is absolutely not an algorithm because we have no idea which way to go is the right way that has infinitely many nodes. Yeah.
This isn't, can I make a point just in the idea that it's not great exposition because there's a supposition? I mean, it's kind of like pure exposition would be, it's completely true. But the exhibitions here with both cases involve an assumption about irrational or irrationality. So, I would think exhibition would be, it's completely true. You have a complete handle of the whole truth. But if irrational or if rational, there's this vagueness.
So you mean that insofar is not, I do not exhibit an example because I do not know which is the example.
Well, no, but yeah, but I mean, that's, I guess, part of what you said already. But I wanted to just highlight the assumption part.
Which is the excluded middle? What's the assumption?
No, the assumption is if rational, then done. So with the second part's the more exhibition part. If irrational, then blah, blah, blah. But it's a imperfect exhibition because there's this assumption part.
Okay. I see. Good.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice remark.
You read, meaning if one branch of the disjunct fails, you actually use that failure in the other.
Well, yeah, use the failure, but it involves the assumption. So as an exhibition, it's not ideal. It's not a pure exhibition, I would say.
Yeah, you could say, look, here's why it's a non-constructive existence, because you're trying to say there exist two numbers. Okay, what are they? Well, we wanted to exhibit a single pair, but all you gave me was two pairs. Maybe that's. Well, yeah,
I was just trying to focus on the idea of exhibition,
Uh-huh.
and that it's not. I don't think it's the ideal of exposition that's part of constructive mathematics because of the assumption of rationality.
Yeah, so it's a
It's
condition.
not effective. So you don't just get one result.
Yeah.
We should let him continue. This is kind of a discussion at this point.
No, this is a lovely discussion. Does it move anyone at all if I point out that with disjunctions in the language of arithmetic, you can code up some highly non-trivial statement. So you can write down something like n equals 0 and the Riemann hypothesis is true, or n equals 1 and the Riemann hypothesis is false. And then I can say, yeah, there exists some number n such that that is true. There exists a number n such that either n is 0 in Riemann or n is 1 and not Riemann. But deciding the disjunction is totally non-trivial. Does that make this feel less constructive? Maybe not, because in this case it is so explicit. So, yeah.
No, but yesterday I made a point for which it is, according to me, is constructive. But that's not the point that I'm doing here. The point that I'm doing here is that if suppose that is not constructive, let's accept that it is not constructive.
Mhm.
Okay, even I'm not sure, but let's accept that it is not constructive. If it is not constructive, it's not being and not constructive does not depend on the fact that the proof of existence are not by exhibition.
So thinking it's
what
not
makes
constructive
it
for
not
different
constructive is something else.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm quite sympathetic to this possibility. Maybe
Or
we should-
perhaps that the exhibition are not complete exhibition, as John says. This is a nice point.
Well, maybe we should keep moving.
Okay, go.
Because I feel very bad that I have been telling
Okay,
you
go,
about
go.
the Dialectica translation and we have not got into the Dialectica
Okay,
translation.
go
So
for
let's
the
move
dialectic
swiftly
translation.
ahead.
Go dialectic translation. Here it is.
Yeah, well, I first have to say something about briefly. Okay, so far we've been discussing the characterization of constructive mathematics from Gödel's point of view. I think he has a nice, relatively sharp characterization of what constructive mathematics is supposed to look like. But now, why is constructive mathematics supposed to be epistemologically better than non-constructive? And here I think the story that he tells is not very satisfying. So here is what he says. Gödel basically claims that we can get more certainty by reducing non-constructive to constructive systems. In the lecture at Cell Cells, he gives his fullest discussion of the significance of a consistency proof, and he says, the question of a consistency proof has, however, also an epistemological side. After all, we want a consistency proof for the purpose of a better foundation of mathematics, laying the foundations more securely. And there can be mathematically very interesting proofs that do not accomplish this, as, for example, task keys for analysis. A proof is only satisfying if it either A, reduces to a proper part, or B, reduces to something which, while not a part, is more evident, reliable, etc., so that one's conviction is thereby strengthened. A signifies, without doubt, an objective step forward. Making assumptions superfluous is almost the same as a proof. B is at the outset problematic because subjectively different, but de facto not so bad, since there exists general agreement that constructive systems are better than those that work with the existential there is. And also historically the task has been to reduce non-constructive to constructive mathematics. There's really quite a lot going on in this cryptic condensed passage. So first of all, let me make a few comments. We were talking earlier, back on page 2 of the handout, I had 2 pictures of what a consistency proof might look like. Option A here is reduces to a proper part. That's the left-hand picture, where you're proving consistency on the basis of some small part of the theory. That's what is ruled out by the second incompleteness theorem. You cannot have a consistency proof of type A, where you reduce to a proper part. So we are stuck with type B. B is at the outset problematic, he says. I think it is problematic not only at the outset, I think it is quite problematic. If you think the point of consistency proof is to get more, is to make it more evident or reliable that a theory is free from contradiction, well, why is a constructive system supposed to be better at doing that? So I have 2 objections. One is that practically everyone is already convinced that Peano arithmetic is free from contradiction. It is not seriously doubted by ordinary mathematicians. And my second objection is that even if there is still some room for doubting the consistency of Peano arithmetic, because after all, proofs in Peano arithmetic can become combinatorially very complicated. They can involve statements with arbitrarily deep nested quantifiers, statements that are really hard for a human mathematician to parse and fathom and think about in an intuitive way. It's maybe possible that there is some really complicated proof of a contradiction that we haven't been able to spot. But if that's your reason for doubting the consistency of PA, well, any theory that can prove the consistency of PA is also going to be combinatorially really complicated. System T that Gödel introduces is combinatorially complicated in practice. So it does not seem like that much of an improvement. And again, I have one last bullet here, which is just that, Gödel says the non-constructive existence proofs are undesirable, but he never gives a reason why they should be less evident or reliable than constructive proofs.
Mhm.
So those are basically my objections. Let me pause there. Are the objections convincing? Are they not convincing?
Yes.
That's good.
There is one assumption that I make, which is that when he says evident, reliable, he does not explain this to me. I did assume that what is supposed to be more evident or more reliable is that a theory is free from contradiction. I did introduce that, and maybe a more generous reading here is possible. Let's turn from that. I'm going to now present finally the mathematics.
Can
Yeah.
I just ask so
You're saying that there's really no argument in favor of making mathematics more reliable by using something like system T. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I personally am not more convinced that T is free from contradiction, or more immediately convinced than I am with PA.
And this is just because essentially you're already convinced that PA is consistent.
Yeah, I feel mostly convinced that it is consistent.
But maybe Gödel didn't, right? So then it would be interesting why he thought that maybe it's not.
Yeah, it is an interesting possibility. On the other hand, I would suspect that he thinks it is consistent. So one element that I don't mention in the handout, but an element that really complicates this whole story is that in his writings on set theory, Gödel is famously a Platonist. And he seems very confident in being able to move to stronger and stronger and stronger systems. And I find it hard to believe that he would therefore seriously fear that even piano arithmetic was inconsistent.
No, I agree with you, but then why does Gödel make this statement? Why does he even leave room for you to make your argument?
Yes, so the Platonism point raises a difficult question about why is he interested in constructive consistency proofs at all. I don't have a really decisive answer to this question. Part of it may be that he's interested in scoping out the opposition, so to speak. Just he's interested in exploring a philosophical viewpoint different than his own. That may be part of it. Part of it may be that he was motivated by this polemical dispute between Hilbert and the intuitionists, and this was, part of his intellectual formation was being brought up in this climate of disagreement, and so he may have been interested in settling the controversy in a mathematical way. Another part of it, I suspect, is that he thinks that constructive mathematics leads to interesting mathematics, that it leads to an exploration of mathematical phenomena that classical mathematics neglects or underemphasizes. And one very tantalizing, although not very developed thing, that shows up in the Dialectica paper. At the end of the first paragraph of the Dialectica paper, Marco, would you mind scrolling up to page 3 of the handout just so people can look at it?
Page 3.
Page 3, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the end, he says that abstract concepts in this context are concepts that are about thought structures or thought contents. For example, proofs, meaningful propositions, and so on. And that in the proofs, a reflection upon meanings is necessary. I think Gödel thought that the constructivistic tradition had reflected more deeply than classical mathematics about intentional phenomena, intentional aspects of proof and reasoning and meaning. And I think he was optimistic about the possibility of intentional logic, and so this is going in a more constructive. It's just a range of possible thoughts. Yeah. But yeah, it's a very interesting question. How do you reconcile Gödel the constructivist and Gödel the Platonist? Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually even worse because I think in the paper, What is Cantor's Continuum Hypothesis, he even says something like the arbitrary, transfinite iteration of the power set is necessary to account for finitary mathematics.
Ah.
So yeah, it's very strange to see him doing this when this was asserted just a few years earlier. Yeah, I just wonder, have you encountered anything where he reflects on these two different views? Or?
There are some passages, but I've never been able to piece together a complete picture. One claim that I'll tentatively advance is that I don't think that. So okay, sometimes he talks about Platonism, and he calls himself a Platonist or a realist. I don't think he considers constructive mathematics to be an anti-realist or anti-Platonist position.
Mm-hmm.
Constructive mathematics just investigates different phenomena that are more closely tied to the mental aspects, mental construction, meaning, intentional phenomena, rules, the way we can understand and grasp or follow a rule in mathematics. That sort of thing is part of constructive mathematics. So it's not just that constructive mathematics is some kind of strangely eviscerated fragment of classical mathematics. I think he thinks of it as its own thing with integrity in the subject matter. That's my guess. And it is actually interesting with this Dialectica work that he is using higher types.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some similarity to what he says in set theory. I don't know what to make of this analogy. It's maybe too broad to really give you that much, but the passage to higher types that he speaks of so favorably in set theory has a kind of analog here. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting too because a lot of the Kefferman's work in the 70s and 80s was on looking at ostensibly strong subsystems of second-order arithmetic and giving constructivistic reductions of these things. So you don't actually need all that power. It's a very strange situation. Yeah,
it is a
and
strange.
presumably Gödel would like that because of what he's writing here. But I don't know. Yeah. Or just think of it as maybe a different investigation of the phenomenon.
Yeah. But yeah, it is strange. After all, he says that this has an epistemological side. That's what makes it strange, perhaps. It's kind of hard to square this with the picture you get out of, is it the continuum hypothesis, the Cantor's continuum problem paper, where he talks about things like the internal and external justification? And,
Yes, yeah.
I can't remember if that's right. Anyway, he seems to have a pretty different epistemological
Totally
story
different,
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting. There are writings, or rather reports, by Hao Wang of conversations with Gödel, where he seems to suggest that in the mathematics of the future, a deeper understanding of the foundations of set theory might ground set theory in some kind of intentional mathematics. A theory of concepts, which for Gödel, concepts is an intentional notion, and that somehow what you should really be doing as logicians is coming up with a theory of intentional concepts and a theory of meanings, and then sets would drop out as the extensions of these intentional objects that were really the fundamental ones. But again, it does not fit with the epistemological picture that he gives in the continuum picture. So I don't know.
It's interesting. Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah.
So did him and Georg Kreisel ever correspond about these kinds of questions, or?
They certainly talked extensively about the Dialectica translation, and so they must have talked about these questions.
So Kreisel also has this quote, it's like, what can, if we have a proof of a theorem, what more can it tell us other than just that the theory is true?
Yeah. And that is very much in the spirit of what the Dialectica translation is giving. So Kreisel's program is as you probably know, or perhaps Kreisel's program is the ancestor of the modern program of proof mining, and proof mining is entirely about this question of what more do I know if I know that a theorem was proved in a certain way? What extra information can I mine or extract from the proof besides just the conclusion? And the Dialectica translation has been used in proof mining very fruitfully as a way of extracting constructive information from classical proofs. Yeah.
Have you heard about this problem of the divide between finite and infinite? It looks like in combinatorics very recently they found some new properties of Ramsey theorems that sort of challenge the idea that the infinite cannot be completely characterized by finite limits, right? I just read it very recently in Sequenta, 2016, about a new, maybe I can send you, and I really don't know, but it looks like the article says mathematicians breed finite infinity divide. So it looks like there is some discussion on exactly where is the point that divides finite and infinite. And very recently, studies or investigations try to challenge that point. I don't know if that's could be perhaps relevant to this discussion. I suspect it could be.
I'm not totally certain if this is what that article was talking about, but it sounds to me like this article may have in mind versions of Ramsey's theorem that are not provable in Peano arithmetic. And so in that sense, some people consider Peano arithmetic to be the limit of finitary mathematics, or the mathematics of finite objects and finite structures. And some evidence for this is that Peano arithmetic is in some sense equivalent with the theory of hereditarily finite sets. So there's this kind of natural idea that it's really only talking about finite things. And then it is quite interesting and surprising that you can get these Ramsey theorems that are so simple to state, but which exceed PA. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we go to the dialectical translation? So,
All right, let's do it. Let us finally do
point of your talk.
Yes, we have to get to the dialectical translation. So, I am not going to go through every technical detail. I've erred on the side of being not too technical, but I will start with I'll start with section 5 of the handout, and then I'm going to move to the second handout and make just a couple of comments. I won't go through everything, but I'll try to give you the flavor of System T and the translation. Okay, what is the dialectical translation? The dialectical translation is an interpretation of arithmetic in a quantifier-free theory T of what Gödel calls computable functions of finite time. And as you can see, there is a little bit of small print attached to this statement. What is meant by interpretation? Roughly a translation that carries theorems to theorems, but as I was saying with Marco earlier, you have to be careful because normally an interpretation in logic would be expected to respect first-order logical structure, but we are interpreting a quantificational theory and a quantifier-free theory, so you cannot respect all of the logical structure, you cannot respect the quantificational structure because you're getting rid of the quantifiers. So what does it mean to give an interpretation? I will say that in a little bit. It's the second bullet in section 5 if you want to jump ahead. Arithmetic. Gödel states the dialectical translation as an interpretation of hating arithmetic, which is intuitionistic first-order arithmetic, but you can also do it for classical first-order arithmetic. You can do it for Peano arithmetic. So I'm just going to speak of arithmetic loosely and not fuss about that. Quantifier-free. Sorry, Marco, you look like you're trying to get a word in. Okay. Quantifier-free means free of existential quantifiers, free of negated universal quantifiers, free of propositional operations being applied to universal quantifiers, just like Gödel wants out of a strictly constructive theory. And then the last point, what is a computable function of finite type? This is where the magic happens. Gödel is getting power out of his system T by reasoning about computable objects, but these computable functions may be more abstract than than your standard computable functions. Also, he does not mean computable in the Turing sense of computable. He has his own idiosyncratic definition of computability. Gödel's computable functions, he describes, or actually he does not describe it, I describe, as being abstract, intentional, non-mechanical thought procedures. They are computable in the sense of being like a calculation procedure that I know and know how to follow. I can say more perhaps later in the after the talk if people are interested in the contrast between this notion of computability and the usual Turing notion. Okay, let me say a little more about what is in T. Essentially, essentially what T is giving you, if you're familiar with the simply typed lambda calculus, the functions that you can define in T are the functions you can define in simply typed lambda calculus plus one extra principle, which is primitive recursion in every finite type. Or primitive recursion, you can think of it as definition by iteration. It is a very familiar mode of definition to us. We define multiplication as iterated addition. Addition iterated some arbitrary finite number of times. We define exponentiation as iterated multiplication, and super exponentiation as iterated exponentiation. And so you can build up a hierarchy of functions in this way. The step from one thing to the next thing in this hierarchy is definition by primitive recursion or definition by iteration. I'm just going to treat these synonymously. Okay. And the one thing that Gödel is doing, he is introducing higher types. So higher types means we have functions from functions to functions. We don't just have functions from numbers to numbers, but we can have functions from functions to functions. And you go up and up and up. Gödel is saying you can iterate, you can do primitive recursion at any finite type. So the essential power of system T is just coming from the idea that if f is a function that takes objects of type alpha to objects of type alpha, then I can define a two-place function g from type nat to alpha such that intuitively g of n is the nth iterate of f on itself. Okay, this will make no sense unless you know something already about types, but that's my best gloss on it. And so to show you concretely what is it doing, it is saying, okay, I know how to iterate a function from numbers to define a new function. That's what I did when I made this little step. I'll call it hop. I made this little hop. And that was using ordinary primitive recursion, not higher type primitive recursion. That's just primitive recursion. It's how you hop from one of these functions to the next. Okay, now you can consider this whole process in a more abstract way. Hop is a function that takes a function from numbers to a different function from numbers to numbers. And this hop is a completely uniform operation. It is an operation you can describe in a uniform way. And now you can consider what happens if we iterate hop an arbitrary or variable number of times, so that we define a function g such that g of n is hop to the n applied to n. In other words, we are diagonalizing against the hierarchy of so-called hyperoperations. Iteration is a kind of diagonalization, or rather, definition by iteration is a kind of diagonalization. And so you diagonalize, and this function will be the Ackermann function. I'm speaking really loosely, and I'm not even being careful about unary versus binary functions, but I'm just trying to give the flavor.
G to the n is up to the n, parentheses, right? Nothing inside. So g to the n is a function.
Maybe let me see, did I write this down wrong? Yeah, I guess I did. I did this.
No, it's,
I
guess.
It should be, yeah, it should really just be that. And then you apply this thing to add to get hot Vienna. Sorry, thank you. Yeah. So it'll be, now you apply it. And this, by applying to a concrete number theoretic function, now we can bring this down to the number theoretic level and get the Ackermann function. So you see why you get something really new. Even at the number theoretic level, this higher type iteration is allowing you to define new number theoretic functions, faster growing functions than you could define before. So it is going to be like this. Okay. Let me say briefly now what are the two main results about the dialectic translation. I will come back and say more about T in a sec, but the two main results. Okay, we have to each arithmetical, I'm back to the section 5 of the handout. To each arithmetical formula, A of Z, Gödel assigns a formula A subscript D with some new free variables X, Y, Z. Actually, these are tuples of variables, but never mind because it doesn't matter that much. He assigns a new formula in the language of T such that, okay, two claims. Firstly, each formula A is almost logically equivalent to a statement of the form there exists X such that for all Y, and then the translation AD. Okay? Almost logically equivalent means you can prove the equivalence in classical logic plus a little bit of axiom of choice. And this equivalence between A and the statement there exists X for all Y AD, that equivalence is essentially the same thing as the equivalence between a formula and its Skolemization in classical logic plus a little bit of axiom of choice. Because a Skolem function is choice functions. Yeah, the Dialectica translation is essentially just a more constructive Skolemization. It's like Skolemization, but you make some little tweaks that make it, conveniently carry more constructive information. And then the second important thing, the dialectic interpretation itself says if hating arithmetic proves the arithmetical formula A of Z, then Gödel's theory T proves some specific concrete instance of that existential claim. Okay, you can witness the existential quantifiers with constants definable in T, and you can extract those constants from the proof in arithmetic. Okay, so
I do not understand one thing here.
Yeah.
The proof is free. It's a free formula. Epsilon. So where epsilon goes
sorry, could you say that again?
is a free formula in a Y. Because could Z is a constant. Z, is already named Z, but Y, where is Y? Y is not bounded by any quantifier. So this is not an open formula.
Yes, Y and Z are free variables. So in system T, we can have free variable generalizations. T is quantifier free, but it does have free variable generalizations. So Y and Z are free variables. Yeah.
Okay, that means for any Y and then Z essentially.
Yeah, for any Y and for any Z. And these variables may range over computable functions of higher type as well. That's another thing to bear in mind. So speaking loosely and informally, the statement that is provable in T, or indeed any assertion provable in T, is going to be a statement saying for any arguments, some two explicitly described computational processes always yield the same result.
And what is happening for the theorem that is proven in HA but is not so in PA?
In this case, the type of the witnessing constants will be higher. Or sorry, if it's provable in PA but not HA, is that what you said?
Yes,
Yeah.
in PA but not in HA.
Yeah, if it's provable in PA but not HA, then the type of the witnesses will be higher. So for example, a pure existence statement. Yes. If you have a pure existence, actually, sorry, if you have an existential statement, let me see. Yeah. If you have an existential statement where B may contain additional quantifiers, if Heyting arithmetic proves this statement, then the dialectica translation will extract a specific number. Z will remain, it will be translated as numerical type. Whereas if you only have that Peano arithmetic proves this statement, then the information you get out of the dialectic translation is not going to be a specific number necessarily, and it cannot always be a specific number. But you get some higher type computational information. In particular, you will be able to describe, in terms of these primitive recursive functionals, you'll be able to describe something like, say, a no counterexample functional, a function which takes any how would it work here? Yeah, I don't know what it was specifically. It becomes higher type because when you have to translate PA into HA by the double negative translation, and when you introduce that double negation and you run the double negations through the dialectic translation, it raises the type. And it starts to feel like a no counterexample thing because of the double negations. That's the intuition. Yeah. Okay. Is that enough? Is that satisfactory?
But in the end of the story, it is mean that the supplement of PA over HA remain not strictly constructive. I make constructive what is already constructive. HA is in some sense already constructive, at least in a sense of constructive way, constructive meaning intuitionistic value.
So Gödel will say in the 1941 lecture, in what sense is intuitionistic logic constructive? He thinks it is actually a virtue of the dialectica translation, that it does give a precise sense in which Heyting arithmetic is more constructive, that the types are lower. But he nevertheless thinks that you are getting some kind of constructive content, even for PA, even for the supposedly non-constructive resistance theorems. But it is there is a difference still, yeah.
We talked about degrees of constructiveness.
Yeah, Gödel is very sympathetic to this. Yeah. Yeah.
Like a hierarchy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. I was going to say a little bit more about the math, but well, maybe I should skip ahead to the last philosophical part of the talk, since we are approaching an hour and a half. I should wrap up the main content so we can open it up to a full.
I like your conclusion, so perhaps tell something about your 7.
Yeah, I will just skip. That's a good idea. I'll just skip straight to 7. I think we have 6 is. We can talk about 6 later. Okay, so in a nutshell, I think the consistency of Gödel's theory T is not more certain or evident than that of PA. But I think the dialectica translation actually achieves a deeper kind of reconciliation between classical and constructive mathematics than the one that Hilbert was after, because it assigns a constructive meaning to classical mathematics It assigns a constructive meaning to each statement. Remember, Hilbert's picture was instrumentalist. Finitary mathematics is meaningful. Infinitary mathematics or non-constructive mathematics is this meaningless but reliable apparatus for getting more genuinely meaningful statements. That is a kind of unsatisfying philosophical picture of what you really cared about, was that mathematics be meaningful. And actually, the real-life constructivists, Brouwer in particular, Brouwer was not satisfied with Hilbert's gambit. Brouwer rejected Hilbert's gambit. This is in section 6. There's a quote from Brouwer. He said, I don't care about your infinitary mathematics. If it's meaningless, I still don't care. It's not mathematics. Dialectica gives us a philosophically more satisfying picture because it gives us an interpretation that assigns a constructive meaning to classical statements. And the constructive meaning is cogently connected with the intended infinitary meaning. It's not just a total bait and switch. It's just almost a Skolemization, except that now we can magically witness the Skolemization with these computable, explicitly described functions. And then my very last thought is constructivism in Gödel's hands is enriching and not merely subtractive. You are not just throwing away non-constructive existence proofs. Instead, the question becomes, given an existence proof, how can I find the means for describing specific examples, or at least some kind of explicit computational content of some kind? Okay, and that is all. Thank you very much.
Question, remarks, objection, protestations. So I have a provocative. Say someone? Okay, go.
Yeah, I mean, it's related to the previous question I had because I would still think that there is a way with which one can say that system T is kind of a better consistency argument. And so what is really the argument in favor of consistency for PA?
I suppose people would say just, I understand the natural numbers. Maybe I can't understand them as pebbles, but I understand the natural numbers and I just understand the statements in PA.
So it's kind of a model theoretic argument. It's a Platonic argument. I know the natural numbers, and so there cannot be a contradiction.
Yeah, I understand clearly enough what it means to say there is a number or for every number, and so I cannot, this kind of reasoning, you know, I mean, what are the axioms of PA? Some axioms for successor and induction. They are analytic of the concept of natural number. What could
But suppose you're not a Platonist. Maybe that's the move that Gödel makes just for the sake of the argument, as you indicated, right? So maybe he just makes him, he wants to address somebody who's not a Platonist.
Yeah.
So then what you just said breaks down, but the system T argument still continues to exist and could be convincing.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. From the perspective of someone who is not a Platonist, or at any rate who is some kind of intuitionist or constructor, from this perspective, system T is more evident and reliable than PA because the justification for PA rests on this model theoretic argument. So if you really are an anti-Platonist, or I hesitate a little to use the word anti-Platonist here, but never mind. Just because of the thing I was saying earlier, that I don't think Gödel conceives of constructivism as anti-realist exactly, but well, anyway, it's definitely anti-model theoretic, that's for sure.
And I think you can just see that system T normalizes by looking at the rules. So it's a very convincing argument.
Yeah, the issue with the normalization is that if you formalize the proof...
No, you don't formalize. You just look at the rules and you are convinced. I know what happens when you formalize, right? So you get to epsilon naught again. But you don't have to do that.
Yeah. maybe this is the way to put the worry. I have actually never encountered the position that it was truly evident just from the rules that it normalizes.
So I should say that this is not my own idea. I learned this from Peter Exer. And I was convinced because we had kind of the same conversation, and then he convinced me that this is a good argument.
Yeah, well, I don't know what I think, but I can tell you maybe a little about what Gödel thinks. I think Gödel actually is. I think Gödel is convinced by this argument in 1958, and by 1972 he thinks you have to say something more.
So you understand Gödel better than you. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is deeply paradoxical.
This has been recorded, this quote.
Yeah, that should be recorded, yeah.
But Alex, what's wrong with just as a mathematician? You know, I mean, it has a model, you know, so it's consistent.
No,
What's wrong
I'm
with
saying,
that?
what if you don't accept the model? If.
Well, but that's just a translation into another theory, you know. I mean, that's what models are, right? What's wrong with that, you know?
The theory is set theory, it's on the
Who
same
cares
level.
what theory it is, you know, from the perspective of different theory, you know, you can only prove relative consistency, right? I mean, that's what Gödel's theorem proves, that you cannot prove directly consistency. Relative consistency, what's wrong with that? I mean, that's what we do.
It's not about being wrong, it's about what is more convincing. And I think that if you look at the rules of system T, it's obvious that it's normalizing. And that's just very convincing. But you have to look at the rules and be convinced or not. It's up to you. It works on me.
Actually, I want to take back what I attributed to Gödel. I don't think that he, even in 1958, thinks that the normalizability is evident. He is skeptical about trying to justify the consistency of T in purely syntactic terms. He thinks you need an insight into the meaning. Remember, he says insights into the meaning are required, not just reasoning about the spatiotemporal concrete properties of the symbols involved. So I think he would not actually be sympathetic to a normalizability proof, because he would say, then you are making everything syntactic. If you are making everything syntactic, you have to pretend like the symbols are meaningless. In that case, normalizability looks like a very combinatorially complicated thing, and then you should really be honest and formalize it using, like, take computability predicates or something, but then you are getting quantifier complexity again. So I think it's not just normalization. You have to say normalization is clear, but because I understand the meanings involved, and then it is not exactly just it's not just a proof theoretic argument. And
For Gödel.
I think
For a lot of people working in type theory, it's just a syntactic argument. Like also Martin, I guess Peter Exer got it from Martin Löw.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where this line of argument comes from.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think Gödel really thinks you need to have some kind of insight into the concept of computable function of finite type in order to justify the axioms. And actually, maybe I will just say, I think this leads him into an interesting objection, which I did not discuss. The precise definition of computable function of finite type causes trouble for him. Because if you just unpack the definition, even for a computable function of type, say, nat, so the way he defines it is he says a computable function of type A to B is a well-defined mathematical procedure that can be applied to any object of type A, yielding as a result an object of type B, and for which, moreover, this general fact is constructively evident. So he defines it recursively in this way. And if this definition is a little hard to pass, but if you unpack it, you get quantifiers and conditionals being nested within one another. The structure of the definition is a lot like the definition of take computability. And so, there is this objection raised by actually every authority on the dialectic translation that he smuggles the quantifiers back into the definition of the types. And Gödel argued that it is not actual, that this is not, that quantifiers are not presupposed here. He argues this in a page-long footnote that has defied interpreters. And so part of my dissertation is trying to understand what is going on there. I think I can argue that actually it does not presuppose the quantifiers, but it's a really subtle issue.
Worth another talk.
Yeah, that's a whole nother talk.
Can we say in a very provocative and perhaps a simplificatory way that what the Dialectica translation shows us in some sense is that piano first-order arithmetic is, broadly speaking, constructive. That there is no unconstructive. It's any piano second-order arithmetic is in the end of the story, in a good sense, constructive. It appears not to be constructive, but it's simply because of the way in which it's presented, but in the end of the story, it in some sense constructive.
I think I would be fine with this way of putting the moral. Despite appearances, the non-constructive existence theorems of piano arithmetic are more constructive than they seem. They contain the clue to their own constructivization. The catch is that they are constructive in a much more abstract way. They become very far removed from concrete spatio-temporal.
First-order arithmetic is, so to say, possibly not constructive, but quasi-constructive. Let's say.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. But now, if this is the point, either we accept that all mathematics is quasi-constructive, or we accept that this operation that can be done on piano first-order arithmetic cannot be done on second-order piano arithmetic. That is analysis or even a little bit greater set theory. So that this operation works because of mathematics or works because of piano first-order arithmetic. This is the question. So what we have showed here is there is a way to making mathematics constructive, even quasi-constructive, or what we have showed here, there is a way to make piano first-order arithmetic quasi-constructive. And so that the non-constructive part of mathematics is just second-order piano arithmetic, that is analysis. So I say in another way, the theory of natural number is constructive. The theory of real number is not.
Yeah. My understanding is that the general opinion among proof theorists is that the dialectical interpretation of second-order arithmetic is not really constructive because the theory it's like T, except you add an additional principle of bar recursion. This theory is considered to be non-constructive. I do not know why. I have not personally investigated it in detail. On the face of it, it looks like a perfectly fine recursion scheme. It looks like surprisingly simple, but yeah, for reasons I don't know why they consider the principles you need to extend the interpretation to be non-constructive. So they would say, to put it in the way we've just been speaking now, arithmetic is constructive, but analysis, at least so far, still has not been given a constructive meaning. It's still not even quasi-constructive. And there's an interesting question of how far can you push it?
The basic difference between first and second order arithmetic is that in second order arithmetic, you are supposed to quantify all the set of natural numbers. Not only of the natural number, but also the set of natural numbers. So, of course, that gives you a much more powerfulness because the set of natural numbers, the set of all the set of natural numbers are the real numbers in the end of the story. So you are able to quantify on the real number, whereas in first order arithmetic, you cannot quantify on the real numbers.
Yeah.
So it's very reasonable to think that piano first order arithmetic is in some sense constructive, but the sense in which it is constructive is not extendable to the case of second order arithmetic. because it could be that the sense equity constructible depend on the fact that what we are speaking about are natural number and not sets of natural numbers.
But that's why some people want to restrict, or like look for which problems they can restrict to weaker subsystems, like in reverse math, right?
Yeah. So you could say maybe if we only look at definable sets of natural numbers, it looks a little bit better. But then we run into the issue of impredicative definitions. And in Girard's Dialectica interpretation of second-order arithmetic, I think it is very plausible to say that the computational devices Girard is using are very impredicative. And so if you think impredicativity is a mark of non-constructivity, then it's not constructive. I don't know if the same point applies to bar recursion. It seems like an interesting thing to investigate. At any rate, I wanted to study this further and find out.
Does he show completeness? That the translation is good for any theorem?
What do you mean good? He does show that every theorem of PA translates to the theorem you can witness in T.
Sure, yeah.
Yes.
I would say that it's complete.
Or rather, after you do double negation translation to make it a theorem of hating arithmetic, then you can run it through dialectica translation.
Okay.
Yeah. I was suppressing the double negation step mostly.
But I think he's asking whether that's if and only.
Yeah. I think it is not if and only if, but I don't know what is the extra stuff, or at least I don't have any reason to think that it is if and only if. I think you may get translations. No. Okay, I remember now. It is subtle. Yeah. If you forget about Peano arithmetic and just do it with hating arithmetic, the dialectic interpretation interprets more than just hating arithmetic. It also gets you a few extra principles for free. One of them is a version of Markov's principle. One is, I think, like a quantifier-free version of axiom of choice. And there's this other thing, independence of premise for universal formulas. So the theory that dialectica interprets is a little stronger than hating arithmetic. You get these three principles, which some intuitionists actually accepted as intuitionistically valid and others didn't. At least Markov's principle was sometimes considered constructive, or sometimes considered intuitionistic. So what's going to happen then if we do the double negation translation, independence of premise and Markov's principle, I guess you're already going to have that in PA. The quantifier-free axiom of choice thing, that might go a little bit beyond PA. So I think you might be getting, just off the cuff, I think you're getting PA plus a little bit of choice in this setting.
That sounds like something you addressed earlier, but I zoned out, so I apologize.
That's fine.
Making you repeat yourself.
No, I didn't discuss this earlier at all, so this is good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Other questions?
Can you see if there is any questions on Zoom?
There
you stop the sharing?
is only one on Zoom.
So
there is question by Zoom? No.
Okay.
It's not a long session.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.